I don't think that the obsession with barely legal is an obsession with 18.
Your natural sexual urges, because that's wrong. We don't even say ignore it. Do you think I'm saying we shouldn't push back?
No,
because that's like the
don't.
third time you've repeated that.
Yeah, I just don't. I just strictly think that that's incorrect and ahistorical.
To a different time when something wasn't considered bad. I'm talking about what was considered bad at the time.
People cringe when Dave Chappelle, a black man, uses the N-word. Destiny, who talks about, like, you know, constantly uses gamer moments and uses the N-word. Ninja.
You can't use these as an example. No, right? That's like, what I'm saying. Hold on, because you keep doing this. Yeah, I think that that's a huge leap. It all makes sense now. They are actually women.
And that is the story of how Tomfoolery became a gender abolitionist, because sexism is crucial and because women are terrible.
Yeah, I think people culturally, I think because of religion, we've put a lot of like importance on sex, and we think of it as a very personal thing, as a very like intimate thing that doesn't necessarily need to be. And then through that, we start to gain traumatic or we have problems with trauma now due to this sort of idea of what sex is. So if like somebody who's raped, we have like pretty good evidence to say that if we just didn't like have this level of importance on sex as we do culturally, that the trauma would not be the same. The trauma would be more so like getting beaten up, right? Somebody beats you up and like maybe like you like, you know, jerk and like think somebody's like gonna hit you sometime or something like that. It'd be pretty similar to that, instead of it being this like deep, embarrassing, you know, gross feeling thing that that haunts you for such a long time. And I mean, people at this point even think that like getting raped is worse than death, and it's just, yeah, it seems like we've kind of overcorrected at this point.
But we exist in a society, I mean, like, even if I were to grant that, we exist in a society that we do, and there are implications to it that are more pronounced than getting beat up,
which is why, like, we talk about, sometimes people talk about things like, people will say things, you know, about like, oh, you know, it's okay to have like drag queen kids, you know, kids drag queen night where they like dance very sexually and provocatively in front of all these kids. And like, my answer is like, and then when you ask them why, that's kind of always their thing. It's like, oh, well, you know, social constructs, and, you know, evidence says kids who grow up in like nudist communes don't have the same problems with nudity and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, but we don't live in that society. So like, we live in this one. So yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. So if there are implications that are profound, I think that it can be presumed that the experiences someone has in trauma, particularly, in childhood rather, particularly if they're traumatic, are going to affect their adult relationship to sexuality. And, you know, I just don't think that it's random when a person is interested in someone much older than they are. And
well, people would say the same thing about somebody being interested in somebody much younger than they are as well. But
yes,
I would have said that was random for me at the time. Now looking back, I like, from what I understand, like, most people are just attracted to younger women, but I think for like the sake of maturity wise and having like a congruent lifestyle, we find people around the same age as us.
Yeah, I think that, so first I think that you're right, that a large proportion of men do consider younger women to be sort of, the term that Critical Canadian used was like peak sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's right as a thing that is true of society. I also think that it is a thing of society that ought to be condemned and ought to be grappled with.
Yeah, it's a social norm that we should push back against for the most part.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something we want to normalize.
Yeah, and it sort of, I think that the reason that it concerns me most is that it's not like, I don't think that the obsession with barely legal is an obsession with 18. I think it's an obsession with younger than 18, actually, because I think that the constant like focus on, oh my God, she's of age now, suggests that you thought she was hot when she was underage.
Yeah.
And so it scares me a little bit when there's this focus on I'm not going to say girls, but at least very young women are the center of attention in that way.
So we all had a conversation on here about Mr. Girl a while back, and somebody, an evolutionary biologist, commented and then joined my Discord and started sending me DMs, and I lost that account since then, so I can't pull them up, but they sent me like all of these articles and were like explaining all of this stuff to me about 17-year-olds being at like peak fertility and 18-year-olds, and that this is like when men will just naturally find women most attractive is when they're like at that point, and that women tend to find men most attractive when they are like fully grown around the age of like 32 to 35. They're the biggest, they're the strongest, they're the most athletic they're ever going to be. And that this is like, again, like from an evolutionary standpoint, it's like a protection sort of thing for them to feel safe. And so, yeah, so like when you go look like at all the articles they sent me, like apparently before we had societies and things like that, that's just kind of the norm, and that like monogamy didn't exist at all. This is kind of a little off topic, but there was like this one story about this tribe that had, when a woman got pregnant, every man in the tribe was supposed to go have sex with her now, because they believed that you needed the sperm from each man to give the best traits to this child. And so the child would get, the smarts from one guy and the big muscles from another guy and the height from another guy. And every guy needed to come inside of this woman while she was pregnant so that the baby could get all of the best traits. But yeah, apparently we naturally like find people most attractive in these age ranges. And if you go look at like when men find women most attractive, it's around 18 to 20, and when women find men most attractive, it's like 30 to 33 in that area.
Yeah, that might be true, but I think that just because it's true doesn't mean it's not something that we ought to change.
So,
right?
Socially we can push back against that, but here's one of the issues, okay? And I'm noticing this more and more with like religion and with like even like, the woke orthodoxy that's, kind of taking over culturally.
Me, incredibly woke. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying that's you, but I'm saying generally, if societally we like push back against these ideas so much that just like we're not even teaching people the other side of it or what it is we're pushing back against, eventually there will be like a kickback where everybody starts to realize things are incorrect, things are wrong, and this isn't natural for us, and it'll swing back the other way. So like same with, with like anti-racism, like that has like a massive kickback now, because in-group preference just does seem to be natural for us. It does seem to be like a pretty natural thing for us to do. And so I think it's the same with like culturally, we just say like, hey, ignore like your natural sexual urges because that's wrong. We don't even say ignore it. We say that's just bad. Nobody does that, right? No 33-year-old man would ever lust after an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old. Nobody would do that because that's disgusting, right? And so we like push this idea because of an agenda, and eventually, normally, there's like a swing back where everybody starts to realize like they've been lied to and this is all incorrect. And yeah, it's dangerous to like constantly pick what we do and don't want within society and just drown everything else out without actually like giving the information of what it is or teaching what it is we're doing in the meantime.
Yeah. So there's pretty good evidence that our ancestors were rapists and were raping 14-year-olds all the time, right? I still think that we should be able to push back against that, despite the fact that our ancestors did do it.
Do you think I'm saying we shouldn't push back?
No,
because that's
I
like the
don't.
third time you've
No.
repeated that, so I just want to
I
make sure.
understand.
Okay.
No. I understand that. My point, though, is that like there will be pushback to the progression of cultural norms towards a more equitable and like better world, right? But I still think that it's important to continue to do the pushing, even if you understand as you do the pushing that there's going to be people who push back against you. If that makes sense.
Well, so like another example is like edgy jokes, right? So like racism, sexism, stuff like that. Like there seems to be a big swing back where those jokes are becoming more and more popular, and we can see it with like internet searches. And
I don't think that's true.
I think it is, because even when you look at
that's strictly incorrect.
If you look at the most popular comedians over like the 80s and 90s, and even into the early 2000s, they were like very clean, like, no, not a lot of like cussing, not a lot of like sex jokes, stuff like that. And then there was a massive swing back in the early 2000s where that just went the opposite direction.
Yeah, I just strictly think that that's incorrect and ahistorical. If you look at people who are famous for being clean, like people like Kevin Hart are getting canceled now because they were saying like bad jokes back in like the late 90s.
But they weren't considered bad back then.
That's
different.
My point. No.
You can't go back to a different time when something wasn't considered bad. I'm talking about what was considered bad at the time was like off limits.
Let me explain what my thinking is. The Overton window of what's acceptable has shifted so far that at this point, people cringe when Dave Chappelle, a black man, uses the N-word, right? Like it has shifted so far that Kevin Hart, who's always been this like lovey-dovey, like everyone loves Kevin, he's never gonna like say anything all that offensive, kind of comedian, is getting canceled for things that he said in the 90s, because now we consider those things to be offensive. I think that it is quite clear that we're moving in a specific direction on all of those things. And the same is true online. I mean, like even if you look at the trajectory of someone like Vosh, who talks about glassing Israel, or about of Destiny, who talks about like, constantly uses gamer moments and uses the N-word back in like the 2016, 2015 era, and definitely no longer does those things. It's quite clearly moving in a particular direction. The people who are largest on YouTube are not the same as the people like, I'm going to pretend his name is Ninja Higa, and the people who are right, like that generation is just very different.
No, the things that you're talking about were not considered edgy. They were just considered like normal. Like saying the word was not an edgy thing to say that. Okay, it was just a freaking word.
The largest YouTuber.
You can't use people who are stuck under TOS. You can't use these as an example. People who are stuck under TOS and are having to constantly change their language just to exist on that platform. That's not the same.
Even if there were no TOS, I don't believe for a second that Mr. Beast would be going around using the N-word in his name. Beyond TOS at this point.
I think there would be people, and I think that they would be very popular. I think that edgy creators
in the world.
Well,
I just don't think it's true.
Yeah, I don't know if that matters that much. What matters is that it's growing. Like the amount of people who want something outside of the orthodoxy is growing, and I think that the TOS even will eventually change to reflect that.
Okay, desire for outside of the orthodoxy, you can't describe that when relating back to history without talking about the fact that the orthodoxy itself is also changing.
Right.
So like
that's what I'm saying.
You can say that like infrared is outside of the orthodoxy today. But if Dude Bro was saying the exact same stuff that infrared is saying now, back in 2013, on the same exact sort of gamer equivalent websites, like no one would bat an eye. We would just think he's funny, and that's it.
So again, I understand that you're like making my point for me while like talking around my point. Like while our cultural engineering is getting better and better, we start seeking out the other things that are like not allowed. And this isn't just in comedy. This is in like all things that we can see are culturally engineered over time. We can constantly see like a kickback or a swing back the other direction where we want things like that. So where like, somebody like Seinfeld being, the most popular comedian for a while, right after him, it was like, people like Chappelle, people like, who's the big bald white guy with the,
Bill Burr. He's not actually bald, but he's Irish, which is
not Bill Burr, the
Yeah.
one who was jacking off in front of a bunch of women.
Oh,
Louis C.K. Yes, Freddie. Thank you.
Yeah. Also an Irish.
And so these are people, who are specifically like pushing.
We can still insult the Irish. Yeah.
All right, Kay, just stay still. I will give you the roles. Okay, there you go.
K Fellows' point is very good. Imagine what the popular Pornhub searches would have been in ancient times. That's a very good point. And imagine what it would have been legal in ancient times to have as porn.
Because like, so where like 50, 60 years ago, it was actually fairly normal for big age gaps to exist, even for people that marry underage girls. Like, now it's so unheard of that somebody like Mr. Girl just talking about this stuff gets people to flock to him because it seems like an unheard of, sort of idea.
But that's progress, right? Like, we want to get to a point where, like...
No,
right,
that's
like,
what I'm saying. Hold on, because you keep doing this. What I'm saying is that we have to recognize that those things exist within us while also pushing back against them. Instead, we just push back against them and say, this is bad, this is immoral, don't do this. And then there ends up being a swing back where all of a sudden we realize, like, wait, this is kind of bullcrap, though. Like, if it's natural for us, what's going on? So we need both of those at the same time to say, like, hey, this might be, like, normal and natural for everybody, but at the same time, this isn't what's best for society to exist.
Yeah, so there's sort of two things that are there, right? One thing that you're building in there is an assumption that it's normal, and that desires themselves can't change over a period of generations, which I don't agree with. I think desires can change within the period of an individual lifetime, actually. Like, there exist desires is the product of one's own experiences. And in the same way that I think the reason that people look for age gaps, particularly on the younger side of the age gaps, but even on the older side of the age gaps, has to do with trauma as a child, or at least in part does. I think that building a different society that doesn't have that same form of trauma being induced on people frequently would reduce the desire itself.
Yeah, I think that's a huge leap, because I think, again, like, you're looking at it just existing within this culture, whereas, like, looking back, these things were fairly normalized a while ago, and it's weird to be like, oh, all of those people did it because of some sort of trauma that they had. Like, everybody didn't have freaking trauma.
Let's look at it this way. Let's rather than thinking about sexuality, let's think about racism. So I at one point when I was debating Mio, he was suggesting that racism is a constant and that there can never become less racism. It's just going to change who's in control over the racism. So I asked him, Mio, you're a racist, right? how many black people have you whipped in the last year and a half, right? Like how many black people have you personally whipped, beaten with a cane, right? And his answer was eventually no. He has not whipped any black people in the last year and a half, which is like an interesting point, right? It's an interesting like thing that even Mio, even the people who go out online and like make a name for themselves online by virtue of being a racist, aren't as racist as not even the most racist, but like normal levels of racist.
They'll even say they don't hate black people or they don't hate Jews.
Yeah.
They just want to be separate from them.
And so, like, it strikes me that I think Mio genuinely believes that. I think that Mio probably genuinely doesn't want to be a slave owner, which is like remarkable at some level.
It's weird. Right? You can actually see when we look at like all of the dog whistles and things from, 4 or 5 years ago, and like all of the things that we were afraid of, and the Gamergate bullcrap and all of that, the stuff that we said, hey, this isn't what they actually believe. This is the propaganda that they put out to whitewash what they actually believe. The new generation of racists actually believe in the whitewashed version and are whitewashing on top of that. And so it's like, it seems like some version of Mio and Nick Fuentes in 5-10 years will have the whitewashed version of what they're saying and actually believe the propaganda that they were putting out instead of their real beliefs.
Like, people joke about it, but I unironically do think that it is incredibly telling and wonderful at the end of the day that one of the most important white supremacists in the country right now is named Nick Fuentes. I think that's awesome. That's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
Like, unironically, that's such a wonderful thing that happened, because there's no way that his predecessors wouldn't have lynched him, right? Like, there's no way. Of course they would. And so, like, the fact that we're able to expand there, and even the worst, like, furthest extremities in the wrong direction on race include Nick Fuentes as a white man, suggests to me that we can get to a place where, even the worst extremities in the sexual landscape consider Mr. Girl a problem. And I want to get there.
Wait, repeat that last part.
I want to get to a point where, in the same way that the most racist people in this country, like Nick Fuentes, despite his last name being Fuentes, I want to get to the point where, in the same way that the racist, genuinely believe that they are opposed to slavery, I want to get to the point where they're similarly the worst people in the country in terms of sexuality genuinely believe that they're different than Mr. Girl and genuinely believe that he's abhorrent.
Genuinely believe that he's a what?
Abhorrent.
Abhorrent. Huh. I don't see it. See, again, though, I don't think Mr. Girl's actually saying anything that's like incorrect. I think that he gives both sides of that, and I think that that's like what we need, is somebody who actually gives both sides of it, because otherwise we just keep ending up
both sides. Who in our society is giving both sides on the slavery argument?
Me. People like.
Are you? What are the two sides of the slavery argument?
That we actually do have in-group preferenses, that we actually do flock to people who look like us and act like us, and
it's not the slavery argument. What?
I'm not talking about a slavery argument. What are you talking about?
I'm saying.
But Mr. Girl has nothing to do with the slavery argument. You said you want people to think that Mr. Girl is abhorrent, and so I'm saying that somebody like Mr. Girl is giving both sides of the argument instead of just the sanitized version.
My point is that we don't hear both sides of the slavery argument anymore, right?
What's both sides of the slavery argument?
Is that. Say it again?
What's both sides of the slavery argument?
Well, at one point, it was a massive ordeal that we literally split in two as a country over. It was a huge debate.
Hold on. Okay.
It's
When
no
I'm
longer
saying,
a
hold
huge
on.
debate.
When I'm saying both sides, I'm saying the correct things, the things that are actually true. I'm saying right now, we will say, this is what's best for society. Therefore, like anything that's not this is automatically bad. Okay. But the other side is, it's also unnatural for us to go in this direction and to,
I think that we would have said a long time ago that it's unnatural for blacks and whites to mix.
okay, you're not,
Well, I think that's true. Like, that
I
is
don't think
strictly
you're
true,
hearing,
right?
it's not relevant. It has it doesn't matter whatsoever. It has nothing to do with what I'm saying. I'm saying we should do the social engineering while also acknowledging that the social engineering that we're doing goes against our natural predilections. And so if we don't acknowledge that second part, there ends up being a swing back every single time. But if we acknowledge it
My
as
point
a
is that-
full picture that yes, this is not what we will naturally do, yet morals are like what's best for society. So what we need to do morally is this other thing anyways.
My point is that natural predilections change over time.
To some degree, but not really. Not that much.
I think that we are materially different in our natural predilections on race.
How so?
I think that even people who were like very thoughtful, were deep thinkers, were, seriously grappling with the world around them, people like Thomas Jefferson were also simultaneously rapists who kept slaves in the basement. And I think that we have progressed as a society where even people who are not particularly thoughtful thinkers are a lot better on race than Thomas Jefferson, who was thinking about it a lot harder than the average American does today.
Yeah.
So I want to get to a point where even people who aren't thinking about sex all that hard have better views on sex than Mr. Girl, who seems to be thinking about sex a lot.
You're going to have to give like a lot more detail that I'm not understanding at all.
I think that Mr. Girl's views on sex are very bad.
So like
and
what?
I think that he is much more permissive of his desire for children than I'm comfortable with. And I think that he is much more I think that's the primary issue is that I think that he is permissive of pedophilia in a way that is really gross.
Okay. I think there's like
I
no
want to get to a place
evidence
where
of this.
That's not a thing that people do.
I think him acknowledging that someone can be attracted to children without being some like sick maniac, I think him just acknowledging this does not mean that he's dismissive of it, because he doesn't want people to be attracted to children. He doesn't want them to be in relationships with children. He doesn't want, children to be sex objects. So like, I'm literally the same as Mr. Girl. I don't understand like what the issue there is. He's giving both sides of the argument where he's saying, yes, this is.
Yeah, but my point is that I don't think there are two sides to the argument.
Okay, so there you go. Okay,
I shouldn't say that. Let me
I was about to say, because this entire time it sounds like you're arguing with me, but you're not disagreeing with me.
I think that there are two sides of the argument, but I don't think that there should be two sides of the argument. In the same way, there were two sides of the argument on slavery, but I don't think that there should be two sides of the argument on slavery. I think that we are benefited as a society when we have some group of people who believe taxes should be slightly lower and some group of people who believe taxes should be slightly higher. I think it's good to have that discussion. That's a quality discussion, and I want, even going into the future, to continue to have that as a discussion. I think that we want to have people who think that we should be spending more or less on school, more or less on the military, more or less on blah, 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 blah. I don't think that we're benefited as a society by having people who support pedophilia in our society.
I don't think know anybody who supports pedophilia.
I think Mr. Girl does.
How?
I think that Mr. Girl is making content that makes it clear that is something that he's okay with, at the very least.
Again, I haven't heard him say there's anything that he's okay with that I wouldn't be okay with. Like, I don't know what that is then. I don't know what the thing is that he's okay with, because he's not okay with adults being in relationship with underage kids. He's pretty close to you, and like age gaps and imbalances of power. He doesn't think that like normalizing children being attractive is a good thing. Like his entire Cuties review is about the fact that we don't allow children to be sexualized in this way because it's bad. Because as a society, we have already decided that this is not a thing that we're going to allow. And that by them sexualizing these children and making us look at them as these sex objects.
You're talking about a guy who literally has a song about how he's a pedophile. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, dude. You guys are.
He
like,
does.
So what?
Literally
I
does.
have songs about how I kill black people and how I hate them. Am I a racist now? Like, that doesn't mean anything. You guys are so childish with this, like, well, he has a song called I'm a Pedophile. Like, it's so childish, dude. It really is. It's so childish. It doesn't mean anything. He has a song.
It doesn't mean anything.
There's a guy who made a movie about owning slaves. That guy is a horrible person. He's a racist now because he made a movie about owning slaves. Like, this is so stupid. That's not how art works.
There's a difference between like Huck Finn, which has the N-word in it, and Mein Kampf, which I don't think does have the N-word in it.
But he doesn't advocate for anything in that song. He's not advocating for you to have relationships with children.
Do I have to look up the lyrics to this song?
Yes, it's him talking about himself being a pedophile.
Private tab. I don't want to have this in my just straight because Mr. Girl's creepy.
Well, his channel is taken down. But go look up
Mr. Girl's.
Go look up right after that. Go look up "I Kill Pedophiles." What it's called? I'm a pedophile. Okay. Then look up "I Kill Pedophiles" right after that, since you take these lyrics so seriously. And then look up Lil Wayne's song. Oh, look up Eminem's song called Kim as well. That one, you're really not going to like Eminem if you read those lyrics. Okay, fellows. Are you?
I'm not even going to read this out loud so they're not like brought back to me. This is like,
what's up,
no,
boys?
this is just bad.
Quibbles is being a child.
No, Tom, why am I always walking you having conversations about pedophilia?
Why Quibbles is not able to have relationships with grown adults because he is a child. This is childish behavior. What's your take here, Kay? What do you give us the lowdown?
I think that Mr. Girl's biggest problem is that, and I don't know if it's actually a problem. I haven't truly like pinned down whether it's a problem that he has or if it's intentional, because he's constantly in controversy because of it. But I think that his problem is that he doesn't relay his ideas. He doesn't articulate his ideas well.
Yeah.
And it causes him to come off as incredibly creepy at times.
Yeah. We're literally about to review an interview where he goes on there and the other guy's acting like Quibbles, where he's like, you have a song called I'm a Pedophile, so I think you're a pedophile. And so he's like explaining to the guy the whole time, like, well, I'm against pedophilia. I don't think people should like have relationships with young girls. I think that like admitting that young girls he's like, if you have like a 13-year-old daughter and she puts on like skimpy clothes and tries walking out the door, you're going to stop her. Why? Because you know freaking men are going to look at her. Not just pedophiles. Men in general are going to look at her in this sexual way. And so you don't want men to sexualize young children. So you stop her from going outside. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden men just stop sexualizing young women. It means that we try to stop people from doing it. Like, so, yeah, so he is bad at relaying his ideas, of course, but he's not there's nothing out there to believe that he's a pedophile, except the title of his song is called I'm a Pedophile, and the lyrics are about him being a pedophile. But, yeah, it's satire.
Do you feel like that's a reasonable conclusion? So, okay, I'm just going to grant this, because gotta be honest, I don't follow Mr. Girl that closely because I think Mr. Girl is creepy and I think he's a pedophile.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just going to grant that you're actually right and that secretly he's a wonderful progressive dude who has all of the correct stances on all of gender and sexuality. Do you think that it's like good to encourage people to have rhetoric as awful as his?
No, I think that he needs to fix it, the way he speaks. I have a video called Mr. Girl Hit Piece where it's literally me just talking about how bad he is at communication.
But so you're describing it as bad at communication, but isn't that quote unquote being bad at communication the reason that he is what he is online?
The reason
Like,
that he is what he is.
Isn't he what he is online as a result of a conversation with Vosh that was incredibly hostile, and then Destiny coming to his aid because of a broader issue with Vosh and a hyper charitability from Destiny in order to understand
it's because of his
what
communication
this guy had
issues.
been maligned by Vosh.
Yeah.
Have been saying, right?
Yeah.
So isn't he able to be what he is online strictly by virtue of the way that he communicates? So isn't the way that he communicates like a feature, not a bug?
Yeah, of course. Well, no, I don't think he does it on purpose. I think so. If you watch a ton of his other conversations that have nothing to do with anything like edgy or anything like that, he's just like a really emotional person, and he's very in his own feelings, and he has trouble communicating outside of his own feelings. So he can be very, very rational as well, but his emotions like get him all mixed up and bring him to like really weird conclusions.
Isn't even all that relevant. What's relevant is that is the reason people watch his content.
Because he's bad at communicating. Yeah, because there's lots of people who are not very rational.
But because of the way that he communicates, which is different than being bad at communication. Like the fact that Trump, for example, doesn't use complete sentences does not make him bad at communication because it clearly works, right? Like what communication is about how well you're able to actually communicate and how well you're able to drive the direction of conversation and how well you're able to get people to listen to you. And clearly people are listening to him. Clearly people are interested in the way that he's speaking. So it's not that he's bad at communication. It's that he's communicating intentionally or no in a way that is different than the way that you presume to be the correct way to communicate.
So maybe. So there are people in my own community who will say that I'm bad at communicating because sometimes I will say things that make it sound like I'm a pedophile or something like that. And I do that purposefully to demand a level of charitability from people who are watching me. And so if I'm going to make jokes that are like super edgy or about being a pedophile or about being a racist or about hating women, and I stay serious the whole time, you got to know that I'm joking because you're being charitable enough to me to think that that would be a joke, right? That what I'm saying would be a joke. And so lots of times they just like, they're not willing to give me that level of charitability, and I just ban those people because I'd rather just not have them here then. If they're not willing to like extend to me this level of charitability that would say, I'm not just going to jump to a conclusion that he's a pedophile because of a joke that he made or or that he's racist because of a joke that he made or something like that, then yeah, I don't want those people around. Mr. Girl takes that same exact idea, but like ramps it up to level 100, where he's always going to be on this like meta ironic level with you that that makes it really hard to gauge.
So the demand for that level of charitability, I'd argue, like the amount of charitability that we're able to give and willing to give to people on different issues changes over time. And that's probably a good thing. Some levels of charitability ought to be refused to people.
It should be earned.
Like,
yeah,
they should have to be earned. And over time, the amount of work you have to do to earn it should change. Like, I don't really want, even in my philosophy classes, to be having the primary like driving conversation be about, well, is slavery a good thing or not? Because that's like decided in my view. And it's just not a particularly interesting conversation. I'd much rather have a conversation about, abortion or about, any number of other topics that are, regardless of whether I as an individual have strong views, obviously not decided by society in the same way. And I want to get to a point where we decide things that haven't already been decided in the same way that we've decided already on things like slavery. We've decided already on things like rape.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, to a point. But
so my point is that I wouldn't even the manosphere don't go around saying hey, I support rape. They don't do that. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's good. That's a step in the right direction. I want to get to a point where even creepy people don't do what Mr. Girl is doing. And sorry, I shouldn't talk about Mr. Girl because I don't want to get into a conversation about Mr. Girl as an individual because I don't care about Mr. Girl as a person. But yeah, I want to move in a different direction in society, not in a different direction, in the same direction that we have been moving, but just further on in that line.
Well, for the same with all of the other things, I feel the same with morality. I feel like we're still in this bubble where for most people, morals are just kind of objective, but they can't explain why or where they come from or how they're, why they're inherent or things like that. I'll hear people all the time say well, life is inherently valuable. I'm like, okay, where does the value come from? They're like, well, it's just there. It's just inherent. Okay, well, why is it inherently valuable then? Because it just is. It's just inherently valuable. Okay, then it's not valuable then. You just proved there's no value to it whatsoever. But instead, actually, life is valuable for humans because as humans, we like being around other humans. We enjoy other humans. We enjoy society. We enjoy, we're pack animals. We like being around each other. We need each other to do different things. And so that's why we value humans and therefore human life. And especially human life that's smart enough to engage and communicate and all of these other things. If human life isn't able to do that, it just kind of loses all of its value. So as long as we explain where the value comes from and why human life is valuable and where that morals kind of derive from its, the way that it values society or the way that it helps us engage with each other better so that we can have a society. I think that those sorts of conversations are important because instead we're just giving people these small pieces of information and just saying that's just how it is. And eventually once you start to question things, it seems like everything that you've ever known just didn't exist in the first place. If any of that made sense, that might be too zoomed out to say it like that.
Okay, what are your thoughts?
Kay, are you going to say life is inherently valuable?
The way that I look at it is, I think that the arguments around life being inherently valuable are overly complicated and overly simplified depending on who you're talking to. I think that Tom, you sum it up pretty well, but I think that people tend to get lost in that conversation because of all of the other connotations it has on political and social issues, such as abortion. I argue abortion a lot of the time.
It's obviously not possible yet, but if it were made possible, that would be awesome. Even in that case, we're getting close to the donor. The organ donor perspective, right? So there are people who are opposed to, even once they're dead, donating their organs. I think that's crazy. I am absolutely an organ donor. You have to sign up. You have to actually opt in to be an organ donor. If you get hit by a car and you die, but you have good organs still, you have to opt in to have those organs be harvested and utilized by hospitals.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. I think you should have to opt out.
Yeah.
But I do think that is a marked step forward if and when that's possible. It's also not where we're at yet. And so therefore, I think the conversation remains really complicated until we have that technology, and the technology is free for everyone.
Yeah,
But
I was having a conversation with a bunch of people the other day, pretty much about that same thing, where they're like, where they were talking about how we shouldn't be allowed to have sex with dead bodies. And I was like, well, why not? And they're like, well, because we wouldn't want people to have sex with our bodies after we're dead. And I was like, yeah, but who cares? We're dead. Like, you don't really have a say in anything at that point. And they're like, well, then why do wills exist? And I was like, wills exist because the people who love you care what you want after you're dead. The rest of us don't care, which is exactly why we shouldn't.
Also, they were written when you were alive.
Well, sure, but once you're dead, so from what I understand, the only reason that we even care about a will is that you could, like, it would be it used to be a big problem where parents like knew they were close to death, so they had to go ahead and give all of their assets over to their kids and then have their kids support them while they were alive. And lots of kids would just take off with the money and just leave their parents screwed or something like that. So we used wills to like supersede that or to fix that issue. But my overall point was to say, like, in that thing was to say, like, yeah, we also like shouldn't care if people want to keep their own organs after they die. Like, I don't really care. You're dead. Like, if we need the organs and there's people who want them, we should just take them from you. Even regardless of whether or not you wanted us to, or your family wants us to, or anything, we should just take them anyways.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I understand why people disagree with you.
I mean, on an emotional level, sure, I understand why people would disagree.
On a bodily autonomy level, I think that there's a coherent explanation for why people would disagree with you, even if I think that I personally come out on the same side.
A bodily autonomy level after you're dead, I don't think you have any autonomy after you're dead.
I agree with you, but I think that there's a coherent explanation as to why people would disagree.
Like what?
I think that people would describe it as the residual effects of you.
What is
I think that like there are certain, the body is a residual of you, and that your ownership over you is so fundamental that the you of the past still has rights over you in perpetuity. The body of you. I don't agree with that, but I think it's a coherent explanation for why you'd come out on a different side of the issue than I do.
Yeah. But yeah, like, again, like I'm realizing more and more like how many of our social norms just kind of come from religion, and even though most people aren't religious, there are so many things just kind of left over from that are stuck in our social norms and the way that we think of our bodies and our in our lives and morality and all of this other stuff. And I feel like, yeah, at this point we kind of need to explain those parts.
Yeah, I'm more supportive of religion than you are, so I come out on a different.
I'm not
angle.
Supportive of religion. I'm okay with religion existing and all of that, but I don't. Especially, like, there are so many parts of it that are beneficial to society. Like, morality existing at all is like,
Sure.
You know, a great thing that came from religion. But
I don't know if the existence of morality is a product of religion. I think that the relationship that we have with morality is framed through the language of religion in a way that is useful, particularly when describing it to children. But yeah.
So there's always been social norms of what you should and shouldn't do, but the ideas of right and wrong didn't exist until religion. And the idea of something being moral didn't exist until religion. But there were always like prescriptions of, you know, what someone ought do in order,
Yeah.
to best exist with others.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that, because I like the way that we built out our morality structure and the way that we built out our sort of religious structure happened in tandem. So it's difficult for me to sort of parse out which one of those is the chicken and which one of those is the egg. But yeah,
Wait, say that again.
the way that we parsed out our original structure of morality
Uh-huh.
and our original structure of religion, really across every culture I can think of, are inextricably linked to each other. And the stories that we told, that were moral tales, are tales that were used in a religious context. So even if you go way before the religions that we use today, even if you go way before written language, even the stories that were told around campfires were stories that were utilized as a way of explaining morality, and were also utilized as a way of interacting with spirituality. And I don't think that you can dissect out the component that was about morality and the component that was about spirituality, because I think spirituality and morality are inextricably, I don't want to say they're literally the same, but it's pretty damn close.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know that I believe in like any spirituality at all.
What do you mean by believe?
Like, I don't believe in spirits.
Do you believe? So okay, I believe that 2 + 2 is 4. I also believe in democracy. When I say I believe in spirituality, I mean it much closer to I believe in democracy than I do I believe that 2 + 2 is 4, if that makes sense.
I believe 2 + 2 is 4 is because we say it is.
My point is that, like, mathematical truth, spirituality is a separate component, in my view, from mathematical truth. I'm saying something about, like, principle. I principally support democracy as a concept, and I principally support spirituality as a concept, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. What's up, Clark?
Yeah, hi.
Not much. I already know Tom. I haven't met you, Mr. K. Nice to talk to you. Nice to be in here.
Yeah. Who are you?
My name's just Clark. I like to talk about politics and stuff like that.
Did Tom go full nihilist? Yes. Yes, Tom went full nihilist. Tom is in a nihilist phase.
There is something I could contribute to this discussion, just at least about religion.
Mm-hmm.
I had a teacher, an English teacher in high school. I won't give his name or anything, but I was able to I was able to spend a lot of one-on-one time with him, and something that he taught me that will definitely stay with me is how he views religion. The further you go back to older religions to more modern versions of religion, is that you realize that a lot of religion is used by people who don't understand scientific theory or anything like that, how the world works. So, like, why you have your sun god, your sky god, your rain god, or whatever.
I mean, I think that's a bit oversimplified, because religion existed before science, and so
That's the point. Religion
here's the way
was prehistoric
explain it.
science.
Here's the way I'd explain the same basic principle that your teacher was saying. Religion is expected to answer all questions, and as a product of being expected to answer all questions, you're going to answer questions with answers that are imperfect and sometimes even wrong. The same thing is true with philosophy. When you talk to someone in a chemistry lab, they're very rarely, like, incorrect. Whereas philosophy, if you go to a philosophy department, even a very good one, they're regularly just, like, incorrect. And centuries from now, we will have more criticisms of present philosophers, I think, than present chemists. I think that we're going to, like, categorically reject certain present philosophers in a way that we won't categorically reject the learnings of present day chemists, even if they're individually wrong on an individual topic. And I don't think that that's a condemnation, actually, of religion or of philosophy. I think it's just an understanding that the questions that are being asked are harder questions than the questions that are being asked in chemistry labs.
Or,
Yeah.
philosophy really just also isn't technically based in political, or sorry, I got distracted by Tom's poll.
What's Tom's poll?
Is
Life
life
inherently valuable? Yes. I'm clicking yes. Sorry, continue.
I kind of got sidetracked. Oh yeah, I was saying that like religion, philosophy isn't really as based in scientific fact or theory as compared to like philosophy would be. So of course, like there'd be more people that would criticize something that's more up in the air than like say chemistry would be.
Well, science was considered philosophy for a really
exactly
long time.
my thought process.
Okay.
So when I think about philosophy, I think of it as being downstream from spirituality, and when I think about chemistry, I think of it as being downstream from philosophy. And once you get your spirituality into something slightly harder, something slightly more cogent, you get to start calling it philosophy. And once you get your philosophy into something that's slightly more cogent, you get to start calling it algebra. You get to start calling it chemistry. You get to start calling it architecture. You get to start calling it, art. All of these different things. It ceases to be these sort of amorphous, blobby sort of thought process that are happening up here, and starts to be hard science down here. And it's important to have people seeking to, pull down ideas into philosophy world that are spiritual ideas, and pull down philosophy ideas into hard sciences. But I think that you need, in order to have a functional sort of human-wide scale, and even at the scale of an individual person, an understanding of multiple levels of questions, because we have to be able to answer these really high-level questions, even if we're basing them off of imperfect data. Like a really simple example would be, like, we have to figure out how we're going to design our tax structure, even with an understanding that, like, what you learn in microeconomics has perfect markets. What you learn in microeconomics is very simple models, and the actual economy is so complicated that you can't actually model the totality of it, if that makes sense.
I guess it makes sense.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm echoing back from
Weird
Quibbles.
sound issues. Yeah.
Dreamspeak mentioned something in the chat, and like I would say, Dream, that I do value human life because humans value human life. That is my point, is that, like, humans value life, and that is and we value life just because, like, as humans, we're just kind of built to value other humans. And normally I think the same with like a moral system. Like, your moral system necessarily needs to fit within society, or else it's just a really bad moral system. Like, if it doesn't better society, if it doesn't like fit with social norms, if it doesn't if it's not like easily understood by other people, and something that people will get on board with, then it's just not a good moral system.
Wait, so then how are you not religious?
What are you talking about?
Well, by that logic, shouldn't you be a Christian?
No.
If that's the basis of the largest number of, like, moral principle in your country, shouldn't you be a Christian by that logic?
Well, I don't think that
like, your moral structure, if your goal of a moral structure has to do with trying to not just have explanatory power within a vacuum, but specifically to have an explanatory power within the context of the society that you're operating in. Shouldn't you be using the same language of spirituality and of ethics as is being used by the majority of Americans, which is to say Christianity?
No, so I'm saying it has to fit within like society, not that it has to be like that the entire system needs to be agreed upon within society. I mean that the system has to come to prescriptions that society would agree with.
Okay, wait, it has to come with, hold up, but what if the prescriptions that society has are wrong?
Well, society evolves over time, but your
But my
system,
point is, like,
it's the system that has to come to something that's correct, and something is only wrong if it's wrong according to a system. Meaning, like, it's wrong because it does not fit within the system.
by your framework of morality, would you support slavery at the time of slavery?
No. But I think
Okay,
slavery was
why
an
not?
inconsistency.
But it was not deemed to be like it was the view of the majority. It was the accepted logic, right?
Yes, again, I'm not talking about like I'm talking about the system, right? So within their system, slavery was an inconsistency.
Why?
Also, at the time, they didn't consider black people human. And so because black people weren't human, it wasn't an inconsistency. So yeah, based on that, yeah, it like the slavery would be supported. Yeah, correct.
So I want to build a system of ethics wherein even in a time of slavery, I could condemn slavery.
Well, again, slavery wasn't the problem. It was the definition of human or person that was the problem. Redefining person to make it where black people were also people is what changed to where now.
So similarly,
well, no, hold on, because as soon as we consider them human, now the moral system extends to them, and so that's why slavery ended, was because they started to realize that black people were also people. And so now that's why it eventually was abolished, was because they realized this was an inconsistency.
Yeah, that's a little ahistorical. If you read the actual texts of people who were actually abolitionists at the time of the abolition of slavery, it is not because they thought that black people were full humans.
Oh, I'm
The vast majority of anti-slavery rhetoric at the time, like if you go back, I mean, I've taken classes on this.
Yeah,
if you go
full
back
human.
readings,
That's a little bit different.
Even of black scholars at the time and black leaders at the time,
I understand.
was not the understanding that black people are equal to whites.
Not equal to whites, right? But they consider them
even
human.
fully human.
Right.
Is my point.
Yeah. And the redefining of what was human or a person changed how their values applied to that.
Okay.
But the values stayed the same.
So there's sort of two things that are going on. First of all, you're saying doesn't describe them as fully human, which I'm interpreting to mean worthy of full rights. But to be fair, I think that a lot of people, certainly Jefferson, for example, would have said at the time, yeah, absolutely, black people are people.
No, they consider them like a completely different species.
Yeah, like they viewed black slaves back in the day as like beasts. They did not even consider them remotely human. Like they didn't even try. Like they would say, look at the shape of the skull, look at this. They'd use phrenology to justify racism and slavery.
Yes. So it wasn't the moral system changing that eventually abolished slavery and then eventually abolished, things like crap. What came after slavery?
Jim Crow.
Jim Crow. Yes. It was the redefining of like who was human and what is human, those sorts of things. That's what the moral system never changed.
So I guess my point is that it's not actually about whether or not they're people. because I think Jefferson would have counted them as people. It's whether or not they're worthy of rights. And that's a different question than whether or not they're people. There was no question that they were literally
whether or not
human.
they're human.
On
So
that they
hold
were
on.
literally-
Just to get the language correct, because this might be
Yeah.
where we're having some mix-ups. When I say human, I'm talking about a species. When I say personhood, I'm talking about worthy of rights.
Okay. Okay, so then what was incoherent about their belief that black people were human, but were not people?
They were not
Why was that
considered
incoherent?
human like white people. They were not considered like even.
No. You're saying human. I'm asking person. They were accepted. If someone believed
It was based on whether or not they were
slave owners-
human. Again,
as many slave owners did believe, they thought that black people were human but not people. So what is incoherent about that? Not why do you disagree, but what's incoherent about that?
I believe both of you are saying the same thing, but using different words to describe the same thing.
I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true either. So I'm saying the more human they become, the more personhood applies to them. So the more equal to a white person they are thought of, the more redefining we do of what a black person is, the closer they get to a white person, and therefore the more equal to a white person they become. But the rules for a white person is stayed the same. It's just whether or not you are equal to a white person that was different.
Okay. So what was so yes, I agree with that. But what was incoherent when they said that black people aren't equal to white people? What would you by your framework, which was that you would, seek to be in the same basis and make sense within the same logic of the system? What about what you're describing? What would your point of attack be against slavery at the time of slavery?
Whether or not they are humans like white people. So it'd have nothing to do with my framework or morality or anything like that, because I think the morals stay the same. As long as they are considered the same as a white person, then they would get the same rights as a white person. And that kind of how over time they progressed was the more they were considered to be like white people, the more, our morals applied to them. And that's what I'm saying changed, is not our morality, but our defining of what it means to be a black person.
Okay, that seems coherent. Gotcha.
Because and I talk about this a lot. So I'll say, our country was founded on liberalism, and liberalism is like the best part of our country, and people will be like, oh, so then why was slavery around? It's like, well, slavery was around because black people weren't people. They weren't considered human. And they're like, well, isn't that a problem with liberalism? Well, no, liberalism had the same values no matter what. You just had to be a human enough for them to apply to you.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're just broadly saying that the structure of our ethics that we have presently are valid ethics structures, even if we're not applying those structures accurately.
Yeah, so vegans would say the same exact thing. They would say, we just need to consider animals people. They have personhood. So we don't need to rework our moral frameworks. We just need to apply it to animals now.
Gotcha. Do you think there are people who have different ethical structures?
Do I think there are people with different ethical structures?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So like at the meta level, not just like whether or not black people are fully people, but whether or not people are worthy of rights.
Yeah, I think I think most people in our society would use some sort of liberal framework.
But do you think it's a universal, or do you think that it's just most people?
I think it's most people.
Gotcha.
So somebody like Mio, who's an authoritarian, hates liberalism. He thinks it's the worst thing to ever happen. Yeah.
And you don't think that's just a matter of
his like what he's valuing within the same structure is valuing one thing higher within that structure than another thing in that structure. You think that he actually has a different fundamental structure than you do?
He has a different so I think people like him work backwards, where they say, I think it's a lot of it's confirmation bias, because I was in a similar boat as a Christian. I would say, okay, because I'm a Christian, I want these outcomes. In order to get these outcomes, liberalism's just not going to get us there. We would have to have a much more authoritarian structure in order to force people to live this way. So it's not that he believes in authoritarianism as a structure. It's that authoritarianism will get him to the outcome that he desires.
Huh.
And that outcome is based on his Christian values.
But his Christian values are the same values as yours, are they? Like what's
Enlightenment values came like liberalism is. It came from Christianity. The idea that all humans, that all men are created equal, was like equality is a Christian thing that comes from Christianity.
I should expand that. It's not literally a Christian thing. It's a thing that is the product of a broader culture that was a pan-European culture of ethics that I would extend even beyond Europe across the totality of what was once the Roman Empire to include Northern Africa. And I would also say that it is, though slightly dissimilar, the vast majority of it is the same as that sprung up in Aztec or Inca society or in China or in India. I don't think that it's an explicitly Christian thing, even if it did.
It doesn't matter. The reason that it ended up in liberalism was because of the valuing of Christian values.
That's true. Yes.
And so I feel like it's just a misunderstanding from somebody like Mio, who doesn't understand liberalism is meant to be a Christian framework.
I don't know if just because it's downstream of Christianity that it makes it. Well,
they're against things like equality, right? Like they think that that's insane. They think equality is insane. Well, why is equality insane if that's a Christian value? Like why would you be against equality when that's a Christian value?
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Any other memes? Or should I go to sleep?
I mean, I think I was watching some of my old VODs the other day, and
yeah,
I noticed that like there was a point where Kay and I both were saying some like really transphobic stuff for like hours on end. And I was even drunk. I went on for about like an hour about how I could beat up women, like just like explaining the differences between men and women. And it like kind of made me remember, like, I guess the idea or what really pushed me over the edge to understand gender and trans people and stuff like that. Because eventually getting on the Twitch, I had never met trans people before. And then I get on Twitch and I know like 30 in 2 weeks. Like all of a sudden I'm like inundated with trans people all over the place. And I now remember that like the thing that changed my mind on gender and trans people overall is meeting trans women and realizing that they're all dumb. Like all of the trans women are dumb. They're not smart like men. They're dumb like women. And I was like, oh my goodness. They're exactly like women. It all makes sense now. They are actually women.
And that is the story of how Tomfoolery became a gender abolitionist, because sexism is crucial and because women are terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I see. All right.
Jesus Christ.
Well, is that not what he said? I feel like that's what he said. I feel like that's entirely what he said.
Hey,
Word for word, what he said.
No, this is B saying Jesus Christ to Tom.
Yeah.
I thought Tom was an ally.
Oh, I didn't. I always knew. As soon as he was opposed to its pronouns, I knew that he was not an ally.
You know, I remember talking to